Should you get your iPhone on subscription through Apple rather than buy it outright?
And are Sony's new PlayStation Plus deals a good value for Australian gamers? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined as usual by Alex Kidman. Hey Alex, Dyson has made an early play for creepiest tech product of the year with its new air purifier headphones, which also cover your mouth, so you look a little bit like Hannibal Lecter listening to his favourite podcast. Is this the kind of thing that you wear down the street?
Look, I'm not tempted. With my lack of hairstyle, I'm going to
Oh,
look an
yeah.
awful lot like the lead baddie in Mad Max Fury Road. I forget his name right now, but the
Yeah,
full-on mask. It's not going to be a good look unless, of course, I want to terrify small children, in which case I'll take 3.
that was the other one that actually sprung to mind. Speaking of terrifying small children, we're also joined once again in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by Age SMA's tech editor, Tim Biggs. Tim, can I interest you in a pair of headphones that would make you look like a serial killer with a taste for flesh?
Yeah, or like Bane from Batman.
Yes,
It's sort of
yes.
like maybe it makes you talk like that too. Like, oh yes, I'm sure. I mean, I do want to get rid of all impurities from the world around me. So maybe I could just start small and remove them directly from my own nose, and then go from there.
Yes, I think they definitely an acquired taste. Anyway, subscriptions are big in the tech world right now. You can subscribe to everything from games, books, movies, to groceries, even socks. This week, it's mooted that Apple might bring us subscription iPhones. We'll be delving into the details and likely scenarios, but first, in subscription land, Sony's making some big changes to PlayStation Plus. Alex, what's the story here?
So we've been waiting on this for a long, long time. Sony's big problem has been Microsoft's Game Pass service, which is a subscription service. It gives you games to play as downloads on PCs or Xboxes, as well as cloud gaming. Sony's had PlayStation Plus, but that's just been, hey, give us some money and you can play online and we'll give you some fairly old, generally mediocre games each month in return. And it's now announced that PlayStation Plus is going to be changing. If you're an existing PlayStation Plus subscriber, you will end up on what they call PlayStation Plus Essential, which is exactly what I just spoke about. So you can play online, you get a few generally cruddy games for your money. They are also going to have 2 additional tiers. Elsewhere in the world, those will be extra and premium. Here in Australia, we will get extra and deluxe. Tim, why is Australia a deluxe country and not a premium one? What's the difference?
Well, the difference primarily is that we have not had the PlayStation Now service. In other places in the world, like the UK and the US, they've had PlayStation Now, which started off as a streaming service. You know, you can get old games streamed to your PlayStation or your PC. They did add the ability to download games. And sort of, I guess the new PlayStation Plus is kind of a joining of PlayStation Plus and PlayStation Now. But for us, we still don't have streaming from PlayStation. So the deluxe part means all of that stuff's stripped out. So in the deluxe tier, we'll be getting PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 and PlayStation Portable games that you can download and play. But we won't be getting any streaming of any kind, which also means we won't be getting PlayStation 3 games because Sony still hasn't bothered to find a way to play PlayStation 3 games on your PS4 or PS5. They're only streamed, so they won't be coming to Australia at all.
Curse that custom architecture.
Has Sony explained why that's the case? Because there are other game streaming services that work in Australia, yeah?
Yes, so Sony hasn't explained, and they have said that they're looking to roll out streaming to other regions throughout the year. So it's very possible that we will start off with the deluxe subscription, and eventually it will be upgraded to premium, and add a couple of dollars a month cost plus streaming plus PS3 games. It's just a matter that Xbox brought their streaming service to Australia. it had a few teething problems, and it works relatively well now. It still doesn't work great, especially if you're on your home Wi-Fi. I find it tends to work a lot better if you've got a very strong mobile signal. But I guess it's just a matter of having partners in Australia and having specific people to test the infrastructure here. They just haven't got to it yet.
Yeah, they've always said previously, because PlayStation, as you said earlier on, PlayStation Now has been around for a while. It's not a new concept. And whenever I used to chase them on this, they'd say, look, Australia's broadband just isn't up for the task. And while we don't have world-leading broadband, we've definitely got better broadband than existed when PlayStation Now was first mooted. So I think it does come down to that servers thing where Microsoft's got its Azure servers for business as well as Xbox in Australia. Sony simply doesn't. So is it just money? Are we just getting stiffed to pay the same amount for deluxe where everyone else gets premium?
Look, they did say that deluxe would cost less than premium. I mean, it's difficult to tell because they haven't given us Australian numbers yet in terms of the price. With PS Plus, you can kind of go off what they pay in the UK because it's about the same as what we pay here. And I think in the UK, the top tier premium is about 24 Australian dollars a month. So, take a couple of dollars off that, and it's probably what we're looking at. But then also with PlayStation Plus, it has always been that paying by the month is a good way to get ripped off because it costs about half as much if you pay by the year. So yeah, we're not paying as much and we're going to have slightly less. I mean, yeah, we're going to have to wait for the details because we still don't know exactly how many. Like, it's so confusing the way they've broken it down into 3 tiers like this because, like, the middle tier, they've said up to 400 PS4 or PS5 games. So that could be 20 games, right? It's up to 400. What does that mean? And then in the premium tier, they've said up to, 340, I think? Up to 340 classic games for download and streaming. But you have to remember, we have to remove the PS3 games from that. We have to remove any games that are just arbitrarily streaming only. And there's going to be some. So, yeah, we don't know exactly what we're looking at until we get some solid details.
Yeah, well, they have. The only thing they've said on pricing is that if you're an existing PS Plus subscriber, the pricing will not change. So that's, I think, $80 a year.
Yeah.
And you're totally right. It's insane to pay by the month because they also always have at least 2 or 3 sales per year where you can get a year for less than $80. So it's the way to do it if you're going to.
Am I the only one that's dirty on Sony and Microsoft for making me pay for their subscription services just so I can play online against other people? Or do all other gamers just take that for granted? Because the only time I've paid for PlayStation Plus has been during the pandemic so I can play car racing games with my mate who lives so close I could almost stand on the roof of my house and see him. But during lockdown, it was the way that we could play games together. Does everyone else just take that as part of doing business?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it has been long enough that people do just take it for granted. I mean, you do get certain bits of grace, like on Xbox. If you're playing games that are completely free to play, like Fortnite, you don't have to pay for Xbox Live Gold. But I think what's going to happen is that PlayStation Plus and Live Gold and those sort of things, where it used to be you had to pay specifically for multiplayer, that's going to get rolled into stuff like this. So you're going to be paying for a PlayStation Plus tier, and yes, you are still paying for the privilege to go online, but there's going to be other benefits with it as well. And Xbox does the same thing. So I think people do take it for granted, but I think it's also a bit better now than it used to be in terms of added bonuses that come in with it.
Adam, if your mate lives that close, what you really need to do is just buy a really big projector and just like blast it on the side of someone's house.
Batman it off the clouds.
Exactly. What could go wrong? But speaking of buying stuff, and especially speaking of Microsoft, they do some really clever stuff with Game Pass, where if there's a game that's on their Game Pass service, because they don't last there forever, and we might get back to that in a second, you can also buy it cheaper so that you can have it if you think this is an amazing game and I never want to lose access to it. You can buy it cheaper. Sony hasn't announced anything like that, and they haven't even really said for these older titles, or even for the ones in the extra tier, the PS4, PS5, what happens if you already owned them? Because in the PS3 era especially, they sold loads of those, I think they called them PlayStation Classics at the time, of PlayStation 1 games notably, you could buy through the same account you've got now Now, presumably, they're just getting folded into a subscription tier. They don't seem to be keen to talk about that kind of thing, do they?
Yeah, look, Xbox and PlayStation are quite philosophically different when it comes to this stuff. And that wasn't always the case. They used to have quite similar attitudes, which were essentially old games are old and don't worry about it and buy the new games.
Boo.
But nowadays, Xbox is sort of really committed to that sort of um, yeah, that's sort of you having your own personal history and your own personal account so that when I log into an Xbox, I can download Fallout 3 because I bought it a long time ago and all my saves from 10 years ago are still there. And, it looks and runs better. I played Oblivion, Elder Scrolls Oblivion
Hmm.
the other day, it runs at 4K and 60 frames a second. It doesn't have any loading times. It's insane. But that takes a lot of investment and it takes a lot of effort. And I don't think it's anything that PlayStation's interested in. And to your specific point, all those games, and I certainly own a lot of them, PS1 classics, PSP games, Vita games, all those digital things, PS3 as well, that are tied to my account and should just pop up once they're supported on that console. They're not going to. There's no way they're going to have a separate store where you can go and purchase individual PS1 games. They're going to make you, and especially with PS1 games, you're paying for the ultra tier. You're paying the most amount of money you can possibly pay before you get to any of
The
those
oldest games.
old games. Which for us it seems like a raw deal, but I think probably on the balance of all the PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4 owners, they're going to want to go for that middle tier anyway and get all those current games. I think more people would be angry if it was the other way around and you sort of had to get all these retro games for free or for a little bit, and then you had to go the extra mile to get, God of War. So it's annoying, and it's annoying that we've already paid for these things and we're going to be paying for them again in perpetuity. But I think that's just kind of the way everything's going.
So how often do games come and go? Because I know in like something like Netflix, you just can't take it for granted that that movie's on Netflix. Therefore, I don't need to buy it on disc because it'll always be on Netflix. That's certainly not the case. Is that similar with these game services?
Yeah, so I guess the big difference between the two is that on Game Pass, whenever Microsoft publishes a game, that goes directly onto Game Pass. The very first day it's out, if there's a new Halo, if there's a new Forza, you get that game and it stays there forever, basically. Over on PlayStation, they've said specifically they're not going to do that. And I understand why, because every game that PlayStation publishes is the biggest budget game you can possibly get, and they want you to pay $100 for it.
Yeah.
But to your point, other games, third-party games and indie games, often on Game Pass, they'll have a deal for 2 years. So it'll stay on there for 2 years. You'll get it as part of your subscription. And then as Alex said, when it's outgoing, you can buy it for a discounted fee if you want to keep playing it. We have no idea how that's going to work over on PlayStation, whether they are going to have deals with third parties to put games on there day one, or whether they're going to have deals to put back catalog things, or whether they're going to rotate every couple of months. We just don't know.
Microsoft are pretty good as well at flagging, hey, this game is leaving soon. You might want to play it, you might want to buy it, that kind of thing. They don't tend to hide it the way Netflix is not that upfront, especially in Australia, about when stuff is vanishing. In other markets, they're a bit more upfront there. The other thing actually that strikes me, and this is even at the extra tier, I agree with you. I think people are going to not want to pay for retro because people are wrong, but I digress. 400 odd games is kind of interesting because we don't know what the games are, but it does raise this spectre that we might get even a different subset of that again, because the other thing they've got to pass is Australian classification.
Yeah. And while Xbox basically has committed to supporting the Australian classification system in their digital storefront, PlayStation hasn't. And I don't necessarily think there's that big a gap in the library in terms of games that would be problematic there. But it is an additional concern, and also we don't know whether that, like, 400 games is a pretty small subset of the library in terms of the games that are available on PS4 and PS5 right now. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of games. So it could be that they've been gradually collecting the rights to something like this through the games that they've given away for PS Plus, right? Every month there's 2 or 3 games that are included in PS Plus. If you're a subscriber, you can get them. It could just be the bundle of those games. It could be me coming in as a person who's been subscribed for years and going, "Oh, I actually have all these games already." So this is of no interest to me, and I just have to pay extra money to get to the classic games. But even then, the average consumer, I think, is probably going to have a maximum of 20 games on their account, and they're going to come in and see that there's 400 games of varying quality, but it's going to be that Game Pass thing of where they don't have to purchase a game additionally. They can just open up the library and scan through and grab something and play it.
All of this is, I guess, predicated on the slightly insane proposition that people can actually go out and buy a PS5 easily right now.
Yeah, well, hopefully, I mean, it'll be like it is now, where all that stuff is going to work fine on PS4 and also be a painless transition over when you eventually can, get your hands on the PS5. We hope that it becomes a little easier to get, and it's not as though there's none of them being shipped. It's just there's still a demand, for people who want them. So yeah, hopefully it's something that people can enjoy now and roll over painlessly later.
We've discussed this before, Tim. Do you think this further hastens the demise of physical media? Because this has got to make the digital edition PS5 that little bit more enticing, doesn't it?
Yes, and especially because, this isn't a kind of system where I need my PS4 discs or I need my older system discs to access it. This is a case where I should just burn those things, I guess. Like if I own the game on PS4 and all of a sudden it's included in this thing, I don't need my folders and folders of discs over here. I can pretty safely get rid of those. So I think this is a thing that it's gonna games that are specifically included in it, it's gonna make those discs virtually worthless to people who aren't, weirdos that specifically want to hang on to that kind of stuff. So
not looking at anyone in particular.
I'm leaving the room.
Those weirdos. Yeah, I think it is something that I don't know if it's gonna hasten the demise necessarily, because I think already the only people doing that are people who specifically like physical media. But it is one less reason to say go to EB Games and look through those dirty buckets of coverless discs to find something good if you can just have all these hundreds of things available to you.
You sell them so well. I'm enticed just by the description.
You're going to take your tongs gloves.
So staying in the subscription field, although within the rumor category, a story out of the US via Bloomberg suggests that Apple is looking at launching subscriptions. Now, it's already got subscriptions for everything from music to fitness to TV, but these are subscriptions with a difference, because if the plan goes ahead, it is still a rumor, Apple hasn't confirmed it, they're going to want consumers to subscribe to get their iPhones. Tim, why would a consumer want a subscription iPhone?
Well, I mean, subscriptions in general, they're all about convenience, right? It's like it'd be pretty easy to, add up the dollary dues and find out whether a person would be better off with a subscription iPhone, which they probably won't be. But it's another thing to sort of say, hey, you don't have to worry about ever getting your wallet out and paying $1,500 for an iPhone again. Here's an amount, that you can pay per month through your Apple account with your other subscriptions. And when we announce a new iPhone, it's just going to arrive at your house. It's like an iOS update, So I think that kind of thing is what will pull people in. People who are going to do it anyway and want that convenience factor. But I guess I assume that you think it's a bad idea from your framing of the question, and I think there will be a lot of people who are either skeptical of it or who it just doesn't make sense for. I think it's going to be those sort of premium phone buyers to start with. But as we already covered, this is kind of the way things are going, and eventually you are not going to own anything, and it's all going to be through subscription. So I think this is basically just dipping the toes in the water.
So it's kind of like leasing a car. So when you say subscription iPhone, it's not a new kind of iPhone, is it? It's a standard normal iPhone, but you just pay for it once a month and it's not really yours, but then they replace it with a new one. But if you stop paying, they come around your house and take it away.
Break your legs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, we've already seen phone leasing. This was a thing a couple of years ago. So Telstra did it and Optus did it, and it was about $10 a month cheaper. And it was a really, and Tim, you're right. I have very strong opinions on this one. It was a really, really bad deal for consumers because you weren't getting a huge price difference. And if you did any damage to the phone, you basically did out your dough in terms of the value you were getting out of that deal. Now, we don't, the elephant in the room here is we don't know what Apple's going to charge if it goes ahead with this.
And if it comes to Australia.
And if it comes to Australia, that's
Yeah.
also true. But it's really hard. I mean, I've been crunching the numbers and looking around. I can't see the angle that works for consumers. For Apple, for sure, it locks people in, steady revenue streams, continual upgrades. I've even seen the argument, I think CNET had a piece talking about how it was environmentally conscious because they could recycle. It's not that hard to recycle your phones, people. But for consumers, I can't see it working within the prices you already pay for an iPhone on a phone plan, because there you're not leasing, you're still paying that smaller sum per month. You're getting the phone contract in with it, so data and calls and whatnot. And at the end of it, you own the phone. Here, you just don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think again that does come back to the whole subscriptions as convenience thing, because like, with other subscriptions, with say, streaming, you could have made that argument once upon a time as well. Like, hey, look at what you're spending on Netflix in a year. You used to spend less than that on buying movies. You watched the same amount of movies, and at the end, you had a bunch of Blu-rays that you could sell and get your money back and buy more things. But I don't necessarily think that that's, you know, that sort of logical breakdown is really convincing to a lot of people when they could just say, "Here's what I expect to spend every month, and here's what I get," i.e., a new phone all the time. And from Apple's point of view, people are buying phones less and less. It used to be that they bought them every year or every 2 years. Now it's every 3 years, every 4 years. So I think they would probably be prepared to take a bit of a hit in terms of, how much money you pay per month versus the total cost of a phone, especially because they're also going to eat into their existing subscriptions a little bit to say, here's the bundle price, and that includes the latest standard model phone, Apple TV, Apple News, Apple Fitness, blah, 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 whatever it is. And all of that is $100 a month. And then you sort of have to add on your telco prices afterwards. And that's a whole other thing, right? The main friction point is going to be you still need to pay someone to connect your phone to the network. And all the iPhones have eSIMs in there now. So I would imagine that Apple's in a pretty strong position either to say, this is, hey, Telstra, make this as cheap as possible for people. Otherwise, there's 10 other providers that are just there on the phone. People can choose what they want. So I imagine that it's not going to make financial sense when you break it down like that. But, I don't necessarily think that's going to stop people from doing it.
I wonder if they could. I was thinking originally maybe they could do a deal to say if you're on this subscription service, one of the benefits is you get first dibs when the new iPhone comes out. Because that's one of the things. If you're buying them outright, you can have to wait for a while, particularly to get the model that you want and find it where you want it. But if Apple was really smart, you'd actually put the subscription people last. Why would you give it to them? Because they're going to get one anyway. They're not going anywhere. They're still giving you your money. So you'd be better off flogging them to people trying to buy a new iPhone. But you could maybe lie to people on the subscription and tell them they were going to get it first. That would make it attractive.
People would pay extra if you said to them, subscribers get these phones 6 weeks before other people.
Yeah.
And that would work in their favor as well because they've got extra time to manufacture phones. And you've got people who are like, I'm not waiting 6 weeks for a phone. Why would I buy my phone, from Telstra or from, JB Hi-Fi, from the Apple Store or whatever? If I'm a subscriber, I get it early. It just arrives at my house. I put the old phone in a coffin and send it off to, recycling or whatever. And you sort of, you work it that way.
See, you raised this before, Tim, and I think this is the other issue that I have with this. I did say I've got strong opinions. Is that year-on-year upgrade mania, it's dead and buried. I mean, we can all recall covering iPhones when people would queue up in Sydney and in Melbourne, especially because Australia gets the first iPhone sales in the world because New Zealand doesn't open on that day or something. I've never quite understood that. But anyway, that upgrade mania of you've got to have the new one because it's so much better, it's not there. Yes, the new iPhones are better than last year's, but at the moment, we're in a very steady, incremental kind of upgrade space. And I think until they perhaps go with folding or some other new thing, the thing where they can iPhone the iPhone, basically, I can't see that value in just getting the new one each year straight up, because the differences are going to be marginal versus having your iPhone for 3 to 4 years, at which point you bounce up to the new one, and that gap is huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it depends how Apple wants to play it, right? I mean, if they really aggressively want to return to those days of people, being excited, they would, cut the price of this subscription and just say, hey, we're only getting $1,500 off people every 4 years. Why not make it so that we're getting $1,500 off them every 2 years? And then they get a cheap iPhone and we get money more often. But
I've no doubt it works for Apple. I've no doubt it adds up for Apple all sorts of ways.
And then it's just a matter of making it seem as though the consumer is getting value out of it. Because I don't think the consumer necessarily cares if they're getting more value. They just want to they just want to feel like what they're paying is worth what they're getting.
It's a good deal. Yeah, totally. Apple also tends to, even if it doesn't come first to market with an idea, Apple tends to lead where that market goes. Do you think the likes of your Samsungs and your Googles are going to look at this with interest?
I mean, it would be a lot more difficult because I think the thing that makes this make most sense for Apple is that in places like Australia, they have, an install base of like, half the population. So if you wanted to, strong arm a telco into making this worth everybody's while, you do need that kind of leverage. Whereas, every other phone manufacturer, I think, has a slither of that. And when you got someone like a Samsung, I think it also becomes more difficult because the devices are so fractured up, right? There's not that many people who are going out and getting, the Fold or whatever. There's a lot more people who are sort of, exploring the less premium, items. I think Apple's pretty singular in the fact that it's got such a huge base and it comes out every year with a very expensive phone, and I think that really lends itself to a subscription.
So anybody who wanted to be already doing this, you could be buying the new phone every year, putting it in a case, taking good care of it, flogging it off after 12 months and using the money to buy a new one. How do the economics work on that? Like, what's the secondhand value of a good condition iPhone?
I mean, really good. iPhones hold their value for a long time,
Yeah.
especially if they're in good condition. And it wouldn't be that difficult for someone to keep it in good condition for a year. But I mean, that also comes down to the convenience factor. Like you have to, if you are committed to doing that, then it's not going to make sense for you to move to a subscription because, like you said, you're going to be holding so much value that you're not going to be paying very much for the new iPhone.
Yeah.
But it does require like you to do that work. Whereas I think a lot of people, especially people who are prepared to spend a lot of money, maybe would prefer not to do that.
Well, the two thoughts I've got here on that are Apple actually already does trade-ins of this style, although they are the worst value trade-ins for an iPhone. Everywhere else will give you better money, especially if you sell it privately. Just a quick tip there. But I think the other side of that, of course, is if they do bring the subscription thing in, we could see that secondhand value of an iPhone plummet because you're going to have a certain percentage of that market that goes, well, I could buy your secondhand iPhone. Oh, but wait, there's a subscription option here, and that's even cheaper per month, and it's easy, and I like it, and I get the new one, not the old one you're selling me. So we could see a bit of a deflationary aspect. Now, I'm sure Apple doesn't really care about that because, of course, it doesn't make money out of secondhand iPhone sales unless it buys it from you in order to, largely recycle it for parts and warranty coverage. Which I guess brings on the other aspect, and I mentioned this before, the ecological side of it, this argument that, Apple will create a circular economy out of subscriptions. Do you think there's much merit in that, Tim?
I mean, I think Apple will try to use that as part of its selling point because it knows that a large portion of its audience is eco-minded. But yeah, in reality, I think iPhones are very difficult to take apart and very difficult to reuse the components of. And yes, they've built a whole sort of line of robots and assembly things and processes, but it's not going to be circular in the sense that you give them an iPhone and they turn it into a brand new iPhone. Like they're still going to need a lot of resources from outside. So it's better than putting your iPhone directly in the garbage. But
don't do that, people. Don't do that. No
But
iPhones in the garbage, please.
probably not, truly sustainable and circular in the sense that it eliminates, negative impact on the planet.
Yeah, I think and we're lucky here in Australia, actually. There's a lot of resources out there for people who do want to recycle phones. I mean, you joked about putting it in the garbage, but you really, really shouldn't do that. Most local councils have it. I think Officeworks
I
do
think
it.
Officeworks has
Yeah,
a
a couple
bin
of
for them.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a couple of others that will take those and recycle them. Obviously, make sure you clear them first, but we've got a lot of options there, which maybe they don't have on the rest of the planet. We've talked a lot about subscriptions generally, of course, this episode. Are there other tech items that would benefit from this kind of subscription model, do you think, Tim?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think not too far into the future, they're all going to work off this kind of model. I mean, if you look at Microsoft does it now with the Xboxes, where they will just give you an Xbox and you don't pay any money up front, and you just pay per month, and that covers the box and the Game Pass subscription and all that sort of stuff like that. We're moving into an era where the services are the thing that make people money, and the hardware, if applicable, I guess in a lot of cases you don't necessarily need hardware, but the hardware is just the way that you get the service. So
The conduit, yeah.
yeah, it's worth it for them to just give it to you, and then make money off you forever, so that you can have the service. And it's like we were saying with the retro games. Like I got a bunch of PS1 games here that I could play, but you buy that once and then you can play it forever, and that's not really the most amount of money they could be making out of me. The most amount of money would be to say, hey, you really like Final Fantasy VIII? Why don't you just pay us $20 every month and you can keep playing that game? And that makes no sense to me. But someone who's just coming to that game for the first time, if that's the only way they can get it, that's just going to become the norm. And I think we're going to see that across audio devices and across movies and TV and across games and across the entire sort of consumer technology space.
But I assume that Xbox subscription doesn't get you a new Xbox when the next one comes out.
You have the option of doing that, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think that's Telstra that does that locally for Microsoft.
In Australia, it is. Yeah.
Kindles would maybe be another one. Ebook readers would maybe be another one that this would lend itself to, but they tend to be pretty cheap to begin with.
Well, yeah, I was going to say they almost are.
Yeah.
They're really not. They're not making a heck of a lot of money out of the Kindle hardware.
Yeah.
They're making the money out of the fact that,
books.
officially speaking,
Yeah.
you can only load Kindle books onto them. There are ways and means, people, but do your research. But yeah, I guess it is the way of the future. I reckon it'd be a hard one to put onto a TV, though. Who wants a flat panel that you don't actually own?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's all speculative, right? But in the future, maybe we just have glasses, and we don't need a TV on the wall. We've seen those demos from AR glasses and VR glasses where you sort of get a view of the real world, and they can just superimpose a television on your wall. And then why pay $10,000 for the best TV when you could just be paying $30 a month for a virtual non-existent TV?
Maybe it's a model that would work for retailers, like a Harvey Norman or a JB Hi-Fi or whatever. And so it's not just a particular product, but we'll deck out your lounge room. So we're talking about the sound system. We're talking about, the surround sound or the sound bar and the television, the projector. And it's like you subscribe to this package, you pay us X bucks a month. And then after 2 years or whatever, we take it back, we flog it off refurbished, and we give you the updated version.
Yeah, we call that the retro old man package for people that want physical devices in their house. Yeah, we'll come to your house.
Well, there was a
Retrovision.
Retrovision started off. No, radio rentals.
Yeah, well,
started off
that's
like
why
that.
they're called radio rentals, oddly enough, because you could rent a radio from them.
Back in the day. Yeah.
But it is that broader challenge actually to all kinds of retail, that if consumers can just say, I don't want to spend up front, I'd rather break it up, and I don't care about the ownership, and clearly a lot of people do not, then that's the way it goes.
Yeah, but that means you're not buying that hardware from a retailer, you're buying it directly from the vendor, which is bad for the retailers.
Yes.
My heart bleeds for Jerry Harvey. It bleeds.
It does.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Tim for making time to join us this week.
Thanks, gents.
So, Tim, you've been on the show before. You know what you're about to face. The Vertical Hold 3 questions, oh doom. I'll ask all three. You can answer them in any order you like. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our current big contentious question, what's your secret skill or ability and why does it make you special?
Wow, I wasn't prepared for such a deep and meaningful question. Um, I guess my special skill is just writing good words. That's why I do it for a living, and it doesn't really make me special because there's a lot of people that do it. But if you do want to read my words, you can find me at the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age, where I write about consumer technology. Also have a newsletter with Alice Clark called Press Any Button, and you can find all of that stuff on my social media. You can just find me on Twitter; it's easiest. It's at Tim Biggs.
Fantastic. And as always, you can catch us online at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, or at verticalhold.com.au.
And a reminder for regular listeners, we're thrilled to have Aussie Broadband as our sponsor this year, and they've given us a special promo code, which gives new customers a $10 per month discount for 6 months when signing up online for an unlimited plan between NBN 50 and NBN 100. The promo code is vertical, so hopefully that'll come in handy for Australian listeners shopping around for a great broadband service. And once again, thanks everyone for dropping by. Don't forget to leave us a review on your favourite podcasting platform of choice and help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Done.
It
Right.
sounds like we've just hit the sweet spot for your kids, Tim.
Yeah, he's awake. He is awake.
I shall hit the big red stop button.